Hello and welcome everyone. Our thanks to SVG for this opportunity to present Lawo's remote production case study. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Remote production can encompass broad and complex infrastructures to support every aspect of a live sports broadcast. At Lawo, we've certainly done our fair share of these projects over the last several years. But today, I get to share with you something a bit more simple, but hopefully just as interesting and informative, focusing on providing multi-viewer feeds from venues to production crews working remotely. Sorry I can't disclose names, show logos, or anything like that, other than to say that what you're about to see is a project done for a major rights holder to support production personnel who are producing coverage of this year's football games from a remote facility. So they can execute all of their workflows utilizing feeds provided from trucks located at those various stadiums where the games are being played, and not having to travel, which is important these days, to these different locations every week. So the goal here was to provide a relatively low cost, low complexity delivery of multi-viewer feeds and some selected audio channels coming out of the venues to feed to remote production control rooms. Something quick and relatively easy was the preferred option, of course. So it was a pretty easy decision to do this with our vRemote 4 product. So let's get into it. Going back even several years ago, we were talking about fairly simple setups from an IP standpoint, using things like the vRemote 4 here to create a link and be able to get audio, camera signals, and some return links for monitoring IFB, that sort of thing, back and forth between a remote location and a centralized control room. These days, we're talking about setups more like this. They're a lot more complex because obviously we're now dealing with all of the elements of a production being on a 2110 IP platform. Whether they're local or remote doesn't really matter as much now as it did when we were just looking to link remote sites to centralized production areas. Now, essentially, everything is on this switch-based platform. So we're dealing with not only audio and video, but also control, like our VSM control solution. We've got some customized interfaces for managing things like multi-viewers, and the smart system now we've got is a really useful tool for being able to look across that whole infrastructure, no matter where it's located from a geographical point of view, and to be able to see, the integrity of your connections, your bandwidth utilization, identify potential problems, be able to point your engineering staff to what's going wrong in the event something is going wrong. So typically it's a little bit more complex what we do these days. So now we come to today's use case for remote production, and entitle this a little tongue-in-cheek here, what we thought we were doing. As you'll see, this kind of morphs over time here. But initially, we had a major rights holder for the current major sports season who wanted to basically just get the multi-viewer head feeds off of from their venues back to the off-site production venue that housed all of their production control rooms to manage the actual production where all the crews were sitting. So what you see here on the left side, of this diagram, is venue 1, venue 2, venue 3 essentially represents the trucks that are parked at the game sites and the venues. And what we have was a video router and an audio router, and I'll talk a little bit more about exactly what that entails here down the road, but just broad strokes right now. Video router where we're pulling the multi-viewer, 8 multi-viewer feeds as SDI signals off that router and feeding those 2 vRemote 4s. Each vRemote 4 is taking 2 feeds, 1080p 60 SDI feeds, converting them to J2K. And then similarly, we have an audio router And this, in some cases, it is like an Evertz audio router. In other cases, it's coming right off a CalRec frame. So it's all MADI signals uniformly across all the different venues and sites. But where that MADI is originating from can vary a little bit. All that said, basically, you've got your MADI link audio going into the vRemote 4 as well, where it can be embedded. And this allows a single engineer at the venue on a truck to be able to designate, which streams are going to be sent, which audio they need, because that could vary based on the production requirements. What audio needs to be transported back on this link can vary, but one engineer can use the interfaces within the vRemote 4 to manage selection of all of this. And then the encoded J2K streams, along with the embedded audio, at that point then are fed to a 1 gig uplink provided at the venue, and that would go back through the central hub, where it could then be transmitted on the rights holder's 10 gig link to their offsite complex, where all of the workers are safely doing the operation and the production of the game day events in 3 different control rooms. So you can match up the venues with the correct production control room and essentially take all of those incoming feeds, break them out, decode the J2K streams back to SDI 1080p, decode or de-embed rather the audio streams, and take those as MADI feeds to the routers that service those control rooms, so you can get all of the signals back on the right multiviewers in PCR 1, 2, or 3, depending on what venue you're working in. So that was the goal. Relatively simple, relatively straightforward. Now it gets interesting. So this one, continuing with the tongue-in-cheek here, this is not a use case. This is the actual case for this remote production, and what we wound up doing, because the last-minute chink in the whole deal stemmed from the fact that we were unable to get unable to get switches delivered in time for in the August-September timeframe that was needed. So by the time there was a need identified for this, getting the multiviewer feeds back to the main production facility, it was too late to get switches. The delivery lead times that we're seeing now on switches are pretty extreme. So there was no way we were going to have switches available for the design, which means that the whole concept of switches and flexibility and what gets routed to what room and doing a multicast type of a thing went out the window. So in the tradition of the sport that we're trying to service here, we had to punt, and the punt was to do this all without switches. And so this is the architecture that got deployed that the season's being done with now, which is the same 4 vRemotes for each venue. And each one of those vRemotes is receiving a 1080p 60 feed, 2 streams, which that vRemote then encodes as a J2K signal. The MADI's coming in off the router, and that's being embedded based on what audio channels are needed and fed over that MADI link. So all of that's the same, all good so far. But then what we had to do, because there was no switch available, is we are using the built-in routing capabilities within the vRemote 4s to set up a daisy chain, and using 1 gig links between the vRemote 4s, we're able to pass the signals through so that the last V-link, the last vRemote, in the chain is able to take all 4 of those J2K feeds that are running at about 120 megabits and put them onto that 1 gig link that we have available at the venue. So it's feeding right to the 1 gig uplink pipe, And all of that, the 8 120 megabit J2K streams and 32 channels of MADI embedded audio on those transport streams, that's all going directly on a unicast platform. It's all going straight to a corresponding 4V remotes on the other end. And then the receiving V remote is able to pass through the other signals so that each one of the 4V remotes in production control 1, 2, or 3, depending on where it's going, are taking that incoming 2 streams of J2K, decoding to 1080p60 SDI, and outputting to the video router in the PC for that PCR. And then the MADI similarly is the audio is being de-embedded and sent out on a link where it can also be routed to the appropriate position in the PCR on the other end. So that's all been working quite well. You know, certainly the other arrangement with switches and multicast was preferred, but you know, given the constraints and having a deadline to meet, this was what had to be done in order to accomplish that, and it was put together on relatively short notice, and it's working quite well. The vRemote 4 that was used for this project is a multi-channel SDI to IP gateway. It has a toolkit in the form of an intuitive GUI designed specifically for remote production. It's self-contained in a 1RU package with low latency, high quality codecs, AES audio with embedders and de-embedders, MADI 2110 compliant, frame syncs with video and audio delay, and remapping and shuffling between different audio channels and formats. It also includes virtual sync, blackburst, GPIO, redundant power supplies, and the ability to remotely control the devices that's embedded in the stream. So more information can be found on the Lawo.com website. You see the link provided up here. There's also a lot of other information that you can get about use cases for the product besides what we've just shared with you today. Just a little closer look at the front panel. It's pretty simple. A couple of MADI ports, some status indicators. The rear panel, this gives you a little closer look at the I/O section here with the 4 SDI in, 4 SDI out, and 4 1 gig ports, a couple of 10 gig ports, and then 2 different formats of multiviewer outputs. The multiviewer in this case is just a quad split that you can pull the signal right off the box. So that about wraps it up. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation and found some useful information here. I think, or at least I hope, that you find it encouraging that there are solutions available to meet some specific challenges in remote production without having to completely reinvent the wheel. So in the end, there was a workable solution here provided on relatively short notice with the flexibility to expand and add additional capabilities for the future as time and budget allows. So I'll leave you with a slide that has links on it for more information on Lawo, our solutions and capabilities, and some helpful use case papers and videos that you can find on our website. So you can reach me directly at don.bird@lawo.com if you have any questions or just want to discuss in a little more detail. And of course, I'm also happy to direct you to our engineering and sales staff if you want more information or assistance. Thanks from all of us at Lawo, and a personal thank you from me for sharing some of your time today. Here's hoping we all can stay connected and, most importantly, stay safe. Thanks, everyone.